If you're struggling to save money, do this. So let's check this out.
If you are somebody that is struggling to save money or struggling with your finances and you feel like you just never can get ahead of the game, listen up. These are three things that I started to follow when I actually wanted to take my financials for real, and I'm going to share them with you. The very first thing is eliminating expenses that are not absolutely necessities.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly because, so many people spend so much money on things that, literally just don't matter, right? If your main goal is to save money, like let's say to have at the very least like a starter emergency fund. I'm talking like maybe like a month's of expenses, which by the way, many people do not know this. Like the major like a little bit over half of the population can't afford like a $300 to $500 emergency, right? Which is scary because that could be pretty much anything. Like, pretty much anything goes wrong in your life, you're basically not able to afford that, right? So, to put it into perspective, let's say that every single day you go to McDonald's. Let's just say that as like an example, right? You don't need to go to McDonald's, but you want to go to McDonald's for like lunch or something, right? On average, that's like $10 every single time that you go there, right? Because you probably get like a drink, burger, fries, right? $10 about, right? You work 5 days a week, that's $50 a week times four, that's $200 a month that you're spending just at McDonald's on that one meal a day. Imagine what you're spending all the other times in that day, right? So it really adds up. Like things that like technically really don't matter doesn't it just adds up. So instead of like going to McDonald's, if your goal is to save money, then go get a loaf of bread, maybe some like lunch meat and cheese or something, slap it together, or do like a peanut butter jelly sandwich, slap it together, right? And you could literally save like 90% of the cost that you spend per month in terms of like the food of going out by doing that because you're getting the calories you need per day. Now, of course, that is like an extreme way to like save money, but again, it's not a necessity to like go to McDonald's. It's not a necessity to go to like Starbucks. And I remember seeing so many people get Starbucks every single day, and it's like one of those like super large cups with all the whipped cream and bells and whistles. And I'm betting that drink probably costs like $8, right? Just the drink. So like people spend so much on stuff that there's basically no point to it, right? In terms of like necessity, right? Like it's not their housing, it's not their like bare minimum food that they need, etc.
From getting your nails done, getting your hair done, getting expensive breakfast all the time, or eating out all the time, those kind of things. Number
And again, agreed with her.
two is one that I actually still use, and everyone should. And if you can't purchase something three times, you probably don't have enough money to buy it. Allow
And the thing is, I understand where she's coming from, but I have a different viewpoint in terms of how people should actually look at this, right? So let's use like a car example. So like let's say that you are wanting to buy a car. Let's say that you got $30,000 cash to buy that car. Let's just use that as an example, right? And the car cost $30,000, right? Now you could buy that car because you got the money for it, right? But can you really afford that car? Well, for example, let's say that you had like a yearly income after tax of only like 40,000 or 30,000. You couldn't really afford that car because it goes down in value very quickly, right? And the general rule of thumb is that like you really shouldn't be buying any car or anything with wheels that's more than half of your yearly take home, right? But let's say that you are making 90,000 after taxes, right? And you bought a $30,000 car, right? You could buy it and you can afford to actually own it because you could cover any sort of maintenance that it needs, any sort of thing going wrong with it, emergencies, because you got enough wiggle room to actually take care of it, right? And that's the thing that people need to understand. Just because you got the money doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually afford to own whatever it is that you actually bought, right? And there's like a whole bunch of like car guys out there that like they're making like 50K and they're willing to spend like 50K or get like a 50K loan to get a car that they really like, but they really can't afford that car. I mean, they might be able to buy it, but they can't afford it like at all. So it's just something to really think about it. Just because you got money does not mean you can afford it.
Last one is, if you absolutely have to put something on credit that you don't need and you can't just purchase it with debit, don't buy it.
I agree with that because basically, if you have to put something on credit because you got no money, it means that you are broke. You are dirt broke. You are, in that moment, extremely broke. You are poor in that moment, right? And the thing is, like, I understand if like someone faces this as like an emergency and maybe they just don't really like an option at that point. But the problem with that is that you should have had like an emergency fund for these specific situations, right? Like not having an emergency fund is an emergency, right? And if you can't afford something because you literally got the like no money to actually buy it or get it, you're too broke, right? So, for example, let's say that you wanted a big Red Bull can, right? I think this was like $4. Let's say that you wanted a big Red Bull can, right? But you got no money in the bank account to actually buy it. So, what you do is use a credit card because you know you're going to get paid maybe like a week from now, right? So you could pay down the credit card, etc., right? The thing is, you really can't afford to buy this Red Bull, right? Even though it's only $4, even though you're going to get paid later, in the grand scheme of things, you really can't afford it because you literally got no money. You're literally living off of debt. You're literally living off of money that a massive corporation lent to you so that you can pretty much screw your life, right? Because these big credit card companies are extremely good at what they do and they trap so many people into the credit card death spiral, basically, right? Like I've seen so many people get completely financially wrecked because of credit cards. Because it typically starts off with something small. We're like, oh, they're just gonna like put money on it in terms of like buying like maybe a lunch, maybe start putting it on their groceries, maybe start putting their gas on it because they just didn't have the money for it at that point. And then it just adds up, and that balance increases over time to now you were thinking, oh, you were only having like a $500 credit card balance, but really it ends up becoming like 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, a $30,000 credit card balance. Because like the biggest problem with spending money on a credit card is that it feels like you're not actually spending money, right? And sometimes people can be forgetful. They might they might forget how much money that they actually spent on whatever it is that they were doing, right? Let's say that they go out all the time. They'll forget how much money they actually spent on their credit card, and it just adds up very quickly. And they, at the same time, spend the money that they actually do have in their bank account. So you basically you're siphoning money out of your bank account that you do actually have or did have, and at the same time you spent money that you did not have, right? So you're basically doubling down on losing money to the point where when it comes time to actually pay the bill for the credit card, you can't afford to pay it off because you've already spent all of the money in your account. And that gets people into a really, really bad cycle of credit card debt. So, if you don't got the money, don't use your credit card. You can't afford it.